Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of an attempt to fly under the radar. This will be Part 7, Chapter 8, entitled The Reckoning of Shota Aizawa. Toshinori took pride in being someone who had a steady hold over his emotions. That hadn't always been the case, especially in his teenage years. It was only through Nana's patient coaching and a few smacks to the head, courtesy of Gran Torino, that he learned to think before feeling. "Count to 10, Toshinori. Get control of your temper," Nana would gently tell him, rubbing his shoulders with her thumbs. "Damn it, Toshinori, think before you feel," Gran Torino would yell in exasperation before cuffing him upside the head. "If you don't use your head for once in your life, you'll be caught in a situation that'll get you killed." They had been mantras he lived by ever since he was a UA student, and it was ones he continued to live by in his 40-something years as a pro hero. He couldn't be the symbol of peace if he let himself fully and properly react to every injustice he came across. But that was before he retired. That was before he found out about the bullying and mistreatment his boy went through for 10 years and counting, due to being quirkless and too smart for other people's liking. That was before he heard about the events that had transpired 3 days prior. He had an incredibly busy day, meaning he couldn't be directly involved. He'd been in Tartarus trying not to kill the symbol of evil as he attempted to weed out the League's endgame, as well as at the hospital for some testing his doctors wanted him to undergo. As a consequence, he was left in the dark about not only how the provisional license exam went for his students, why in the world was the HPSC having first years take it, but about the fight that occurred between young Bakugo and young Midoriya that same night. When his colleagues told him what had happened and the consequences handed down, it took him no time at all to figure out that young Bakugo was the one at fault. Was it biased of him to think that? Maybe. Did he have his reasons for thinking that? Definitely. Did he have evidence to back up his claim? Oh, yes, he did. He had both circumstantial evidence and physical evidence. Young Bakugo could barely go a day without being reprimanded by his teachers for how he was acting or something he did in class, and the boy practically lived in after-school detention due to it. Trying to reason with him never worked, and neither did scolding him or sending him to Hound Dog for anger management sessions. Parent-teacher conferences also proved to be a bust, and the negative press his behavior at the sports festival garnered didn't even make the boy blink. It wasn't long before his colleagues began passing a bottle of extra-strength Advil amongst each other before their classes with 1A in preparation for the inevitable headaches they'd have by the time the bell rang. It wasn't long until exhaustion and barely contained annoyance seeped into their voices at the mention of young Bakugo's name. It wasn't long until Prison Mike and 13's dislike for the boy began becoming harder and harder to hide. In 13's case, who could blame her? The boy nearly got her killed during the USJ attack and didn't seem remorseful for it. And that wasn't even counting the security tape from the camera bot that recorded the incident in question. Toshinori and the other teachers in charge of the first years had been called into an early morning meeting over it, a television screen connected to Nezu's laptop greeting everyone. Once everyone was present and accounted for, Hound Dog arriving last due to a prior engagement, and simple pleasantries were exchanged. The footage was played. "We shouldn't be walking around like this so late at night," young Midoriya tried saying, pulling back against the tight grip on his wrist. "We'll be in so much trouble if we get caught breaking curfew." "You've always made me sick," young Bakugo spat, tightening his grip. That had to be tight enough for his wrist to bruise. How was this not noticed? "You were always useless and you were quirkless. How did you cheat your way into UA? How did you get a quirk?" Well, it looked like the cat was out of the bag in regards to young Midoriya's quirk status. That is, if the questions hadn't already been raised during the quirk assessment test, after young Bakugo's tirade. Judging by the confused glances being exchanged, that didn't look to be the case. "You passed the provisional license exam and I failed. What the hell, huh?" young Bakugo screamed, roughly shoving the green-haired boy away from him, sending him crashing to the ground. Hound Dog looked furious, only being kept calm by Cementos' hand on his shoulder. Everyone else showed varying expressions of shame, disappointment, and anger, save for Nezu and Aizawa. Nezu was never one to be expressive with his emotions, but the way his ears were pointed back and his tail wagged said everything about how he felt. And as for Aizawa, the annoyance on his face was slowly giving way to sheepish realization that he quickly masked. "Shut the fuck up and listen, you damn scum!" young Bakugo yelled before the footage was fast-forwarded, showing the blonde lunging at young Midoriya, explosions popping off in his hands. The green-haired boy turned and tried to run, only to be cut off by a swipe to the throat by the blonde. He then tried reasoning with him to at least wait for the next day's fundamental heroics class. He already had a month's worth of detention and couldn't afford to get into any more trouble. The punch to the jaw he received in response made present Mike wince sympathetically. "If you don't want to get hurt, then use your fucking fists," young Bakugo sneered before lunging again. The cat-and-mouse game continued for a good several minutes until young Midoriya finally activated his quirk and began fighting back. The footage was stopped when it neared the end of the fight, and the room was silent. "Count to 10, Toshinori," Nana reminded him, her voice ever so soothing and near to him. "Damn it, Toshinori, think before you feel," Gran Torino yelled, reflexive apprehension curling in his stomach at the sound of it. Distance may have greatly improved their relationship, and young Midoriya may have softened him slightly, but the older man was certainly still a force to be reckoned with. Toshinori tried. He honest-to-God tried to keep his temper under control, but the things said and done in the security tape made it incredibly difficult to do so. What made it even worse was the stubborn expression on his underground hero colleague's face as everyone directed their attention towards him. Was this man going to sit here and deny what was spelled out for everyone to see? "Did you know that this footage existed?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper as he glared at him. "Seeing as how you were alerted by another camera bot about it, you had to have known. Did you decide to draw your own conclusions about what happened without examining the footage beforehand?" The younger man bit his lip, uncertainty flickering across his face for a mere second, before the stubbornness came back. Clearly, this was someone not used to being called out for his wrongdoings. "What was there to examine?" he asked. "The two of them are always causing trouble." That was the wrong thing to say. "Oh, now you acknowledge young Bakugo's shortcomings," Toshinori sarcastically exclaimed. "The behavior write-ups from us weren't enough. The constant after-school detentions weren't enough. Hound Dog's notes regarding young Bakugo's refusal to engage in their sessions together weren't enough. Not even his abhorrent conduct at the sports festival was enough. I'd like to know what makes this instance so different for you, Aizawa." "I'll admit he's rough around the edges, but he's working harder than anyone to become the #1 hero," Aizawa said, glaring at the older man. "He clearly has potential." "That doesn't excuse bullying," Hound Dog yelled, lunging at the man before Cementos caught him. "It's your responsibility to curb this behavior, and you've been letting it fester under your direct supervision." The canine man quickly dissolved into a mess of howls and growls that were peppered with angry Aizawas and enablements and insulted teachings. As he was promptly ushered out of the room, Ectoplasm spoke up. "I concur," he said. "I don't wish to shift blame, but there must be a reason why our attempts to correct Bakugo's behavior have been unsuccessful. It's most strange that you've disregarded it, considering your extensive expulsion record." Aizawa crossed his arms over his chest. Clearly, the math teacher hit a sore spot with that remark. "The boy has potential." "Enough with this potential nonsense," Toshinori finally yelled, shooting to his feet. "You have seen time and time again that young Bakugo does not have behavior fitting for a hero in training. Yet you turn a blind eye to it. He's broken UA student code of conduct time and time again, yet you repeatedly stick your neck out for him. How dare you give that drivel about him being a hard worker and a great hero in training when he acts like this?" "All Might," Nezu spoke up from the head of the table. "What?" he asked in a shorter tone than he would like. When he turned to the mammalian principal, he noticed the grave expression on his face. "You need to calm down, or else I'll have to ask you to leave." Toshinori and Nezu stared at each other for a long moment, before the blonde bit the inside of his cheek and took his seat once again. "I apologize for that outburst just now," he quietly said, shame building up inside of him. "Damn it, Toshinori, why can't you think before you feel? I could have waited until the meeting was over. It was unprofessional of me to act in such a way in front of you all." "It's not like you're wrong, though," Prison Mike piped up. "Seriously, Shota, why do you keep hyping this kid up when you've expelled others for way less?" The raven-haired man glared at his friend in betrayal before answering. "You know I have my reasons for expelling students," he said through gritted teeth. "I'm trying to protect them." "Are you?" Midnight asked, shooting him a disapproving glare. "Because it seems to me like you're using potential and protectiveness as an excuse to get rid of students you don't like. Take Midoriya, for example." Aizawa clenched his fists. "That kid refuses to get a handle on his quirk and his self-sacrificing tendencies." "Are you saying that kid was supposed to let himself and that 5-year-old with him die at the training camp?" she asked in a dangerously quiet voice. To the man's credit, he looked and sounded genuinely appalled when he immediately answered. "Of course not, Namuri. All I'm saying is, in that instance, he only went overboard with his quirk because he was in a life-or-death situation. she continued, her voice rising over his protests. Before that, he learned during the first 2 days of his internship to better utilize it. 2 days, Shota. He was off campus for 2 days and he learned more about his quirk than he ever did here. What does that have to say about us, as his teachers? What does that have to say about you? That's not fair, and you know it, Aizawa growled, pointing at her. I have 18 other students. You sleep in class. President Mike jumped back in, giving his friend an appalled glare. You sleep, instead of teaching them when you have 2 other kids who need help with their quirk control. Kaminari's lack of control over his quirk nearly got him killed at the USJ, but whenever anyone comes to you for help, you just tell them to figure the answer out on their own. You pick and choose which students to give a crap about. They've had their quirks for over 10 years at this point, and if they don't have control over them by now, what am I supposed to do? President Mike threw his hands up in frustration. Here's a radical idea. Stay awake in class and actually teach the students who are actually in your class for once in your life. It's not like UA's a school or anything. Everyone needs to calm down and get back to the matter at hand, Nezu called out, his tail wagging sharply. Once everyone went silent, he nodded his head. Though I disapprove of the way you are all conducting yourselves, I am in agreement that the situation regarding how Bakugo's continued misbehaving has gone ignored has grown out of hand, he said. He turned to Aizawa, disappointment clear in his eyes as he said, Aizawa, we already discussed your role in letting Bakugo negatively affect Midoriya's academic performance, and I don't need to tell you how disappointed I am in your lack of action towards rectifying that behavior. Aizawa stared at the table, conflicting emotions flashing across his face as he said, I was hoping that the pair would learn from each other and overcome their faults. I punished them for this fight because they can't break the rules whenever they want. It's clear from the footage that young Midoriya was defending himself, Toshinori said through gritted teeth. Count to 10, count to 10, count to 10. Nezu will kick you out if you lose your temper again. What was he supposed to learn, if anything, from this other than the fact that he can't trust his homeroom teacher to protect him from his bully? Aizawa blinked, clearly taken aback by the question. He sat, mulling over his answer for a moment before shaking his head. People change, he said, though the justification clearly rang hollow to him as well. Bullies can learn from their mistakes. Shota, I hate to break it to you, but not every bully is like Sensoji, President Mike said in an even voice. It's great that he turned over a new leaf in our 3rd year, but with how Bakugo's been treating Midoriya, I don't think that's going to happen with him. Are you forgetting that he nearly killed Midoriya during the battle trials, and not only did he not care, you just brushed it off with a grow up? What if, God forbid, Midoriya had been killed? Would you still be as laid back about it then? Toshinori cringed at the memory of Bakugo's crazed smile as he yelled, He won't die if he dodges! Thank God young Midoriya did in fact dodge, the potentially fatal blow. He wanted to cuff his past self over the head for not lobbying for his expulsion right then and there. And when he looked over at Aizawa, he clearly wasn't alone in the sentiment. The way Sensoji treated you was messed up and horrible, and I'm not minimizing what he put you through, President Mike continued. But the situation between you two isn't the same as Bakugo Midoriya's, and I think you know that. Aizawa ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated at how this meeting was going. He looked as though he wanted to say something, and he opened his mouth and closed it a few times before finding his words. Midoriya's attitude is going to get him killed, he finally said. He has potential, but I can't just sit by and let him think he's invincible because he has a strong quirk that it took until May for him to get control of. He's not Oboro, Shota, Midnight said. What happened to Oboro has nothing to do with his quirk. It was a tragic accident. He wouldn't have died if he hadn't run into that building while it collapsed, Shota snapped. I see Midoriya making the same mistakes as he did, and it makes me angry. I don't like being portrayed as the bad guy when all I'm trying to do is protect him. Young Midoriya didn't get his quirk until the day of the entrance exam, Toshinori finally said, silencing his colleagues. While Ectoplasm, Midnight, and President Mike's faces lit up in understanding, Aizawa looked befuddled as he gave a flat, What? Young Midoriya's quirk manifested late for his own protection, he continued, the lie rolling easily off his tongue. He had been planning on letting the faculty in on the secret of One for All at this meeting if it came up, but it was clearly not the priority at the moment. Tackle one problem at a time, Toshinori. I helped get his physical condition and muscle mass up to par within the 10 months leading up to the exam. Otherwise, it would have killed him. As the information settled within his younger colleague's mind, he looked downright haunted as he slowly asked, So you're telling us that when he broke his arms and legs during the entrance exam, when I nearly expelled him back in April. Those were the first 2 times he ever used his quirk, yes, Toshinori bluntly answered. Aizawa looked to be at a loss for words, and the looks his colleagues were giving him were unreadable as Nezu spoke up again. I think this has gone on for long enough. Aizawa, it's clear to me that you aren't in the right headspace to properly teach or protect your students, he said evenly. When he received no response, he continued. It seems that I have no choice but to officially place you on probation and have your teaching license suspended. If the younger man felt any type of way about the proclamation, he didn't show it. For how long? He asked. Your license will be suspended for 6 months, and the probation will last a year. Should you have properly reflected on your failings as a teacher, you will be permitted to return to teaching within a 1.5 years' time. Consider this to be your final warning before termination. No one dared react to Nezu's firm words. No one dared to look at Aizawa as he simply nodded his head. No one dared to say anything as he continued on with handing down his verdicts. As for Bakugo, he will be expelled from UA High School. When this meeting is adjourned, I will call him and his parents down here to process the paperwork and clear out his dorm room. I was hoping that he would take into consideration the help we've offered in correcting his behavior, but we can only do so much with him refusing to amend his behavior. With that, the meeting was adjourned, and Aizawa was called to stay behind. Out of the corner of Toshinori's eye, he caught the disappointment radiating off of Midnight and Present Mike as they regarded their friend, and despite his own less than warm interactions with the younger man, he couldn't help but sympathize with him. It wasn't easy to have your shortcomings pointed out, but the only thing you could do was take them to heart and genuinely try to amend them. It's what Toshinori was in the process of doing, and it was now something Aizawa was going to have to do. He seemed to genuinely realize the gravity of his actions and how they negatively affected the people around him, but would he truly change? Time would tell. All right, listeners, this concludes Chapter 8 of An Attempt to Fly Under the Radar. Chapter 9 will be up next. I hope you all are still enjoying this fic. I'm really eager to hear your thoughts and reactions to this chapter, so let me know what you all thought. And as always, thank you all so much for listening.